So we're going to go into accommodating resistance, usually by bands or chains. And this is something that as you're looking through the inventory of things that increase or decrease the deficit, this is right at the upper echelon of things that we want to focus on. Because it takes a pattern or a movement that we're very familiar with, and it has a very small but impactful influence on increasing or decreasing the deficit. In this case, decreasing the deficit, right? Invert what we did with the weight release hooks, right? The weight release hooks are weighted on the way down and deloaded on the way up. This one gradually deloads as we go down, so it decreases as we get to that mechanically weaker position and increases as we get through the mechanically advantaged position, right? We have the most sarcomeres right here. We drive through, we get to that end range, momentum is built, we can finish the movement. So as we're looking through, maintaining not only what we're trying to do from a position standpoint to get that transfer to non-common movement jump from a biomechanic, can we go straight down and up, stay vertical? We're now going to increase that concentric demand to create more momentum. The other big part is there's always going to be this natural decelerative effect when we do something without accommodating resistance, right? We don't want that bar to jump, right? If you ever see someone do a warm-up set with full speed, trying to crank that bar as fast as they can, that bar releases a little bit. And that's kind of a dicey thing, right? With accommodating resistance, and the more weight we can accommodate, the more we can compensatory accelerate, meaning that we're reacting to the increasing load and we drive through. And one of the keys that you find with concentrically oriented training or decreasing the deficit, intent. It's not how fast I move, it's how fast I want to move. It's how heavy that load is that dictates how fast I can actually move, because there's an inverse relationship between the load and the speed I can go. And then we go into this force velocity curve where I increase that load, I can not only hit higher speeds, but I can maintain that intent, right? It's one of the beautiful things about really heavy things. Your intent has to be there. With light things, which we know from research that most power output is highest around 30% of your rep max, but it's hard to really move with a lot of intent with 30% of your rep max. It just is. We know this. But on the other note, if I add more accommodating resistance and deload me, so maybe it is 30 to 40% at the bottom, and then maybe 50 to 60% at the top, okay, now I can start to really accelerate, give that intent, create that power, increase that rate of force development. Just like we talked about in our course, we talked about this iso mid-thigh rack pull, and not only pulling, but how fast I pull, and creating this RFD or rate of force development slope that just spikes, right? So if I was going to be static here and drive up as high as I can, then I should see this massive impulse, right? Impulse is force under the curve, or force in time. So the more force I can produce in less time and make that slope bigger by making my force higher and having a rapid slope, as opposed to creating this really elongated type of contraction, right? Because that's the other component here, time. I don't want long times, I want short times and high force. So increasing that intent, increasing that power by using a tool that increases that intent, that allows me to accelerate, is really powerful. Now, what you'll notice is I go through a dynamic effort cycle, or this really fast power-based type of bar speed, right? Above 1.0, even upwards to 1.3 meters per second. And I do that intentionally because we have a lot of heavy things in our programming. We do. We have a lot of absolute strength, 0.3 to 0.5, sometimes even slower. We're doing isometronics, we're doing heavy loaded partials and inertials, we're doing overcoming isos. There's enough slow stuff. And we have the intent because the load is there. Well, we always need to look at this relationship, this continuum. We want to move heavy things at a slow rate to increase force. We want to move light things at a fast rate to increase power or velocity. And this is something we can do to increase that concentric demand, get a different focal point. We can still get great effort and great results just working a different continuum. So you'll see on our protocols we have listed in our course, 10 sets of 3, working about 40 to 50% of your 1 rep max with maybe some more weight on your chains as opposed to the actual bar. And then trying to stay almost upwards to 0.75 and above, 1.0 and above, maybe upwards to 1.3 in terms of meters per second. Right, and this is a powerful thing about velocity-based training. I implore you to dive into the book, dive into the course, because we can go deeper into those things there. But we're going to go through accommodating resistance. And the key behind that is to not take too much time on the eccentric, right? So we're trying to diminish the value of eccentric, right? So this will be a fast down and up. Now, I would argue that this might be an opportunity for a pause, right? I can go down and go up, but the key behind that is I have to lower the weight even more because I can't accelerate it as effectively. So if we want to keep the weight up a little bit, we're going to have to utilize an eccentric to build the momentum if we really want to quote unquote peak and try to get that eccentric taken out, implementing a pause. We might want to think about this in terms of getting a pause in the bottom, but we have to go a lot lighter. Remember, rate of force development, compensatory acceleration, intent, intent, intent. Also think about where you're going to progress to. If you're going to go to inertial squatting, you probably don't need to do a pause here. If you're going to go to maybe an isometronic, probably don't need a pause here. If we're going to do a lot of block work, maybe we don't need a pause. Or maybe you do, because I know I'm not going to do a whole lot of stuff in terms of coming from a static position later. All good. We talked about that with inertial work too. That we maybe want to come from a static position a little bit higher towards that shortened position. Okay, that's where you're going to get your pause in there. I don't need to do that here. So in terms of your dynamic effort, we're thinking a lot of sets, less time under tension or shorter sets in total from a total rep and time under tension perspective, more sets. Good protocol is 10 sets of 3 with about 40 to 50% bar weight, 10 to 20% of that in chain weight, trying to keep your bar speed above 1.0. So when we set up here, we're thinking, get set, the chains move, so before you go down into your squat, make sure your chains are static, and then boom, rack, that's your set. We're thinking a 1 to 6 work to rest ratio for anything with heavy CNS, so faster rates, heavier loads. I need to get at least 6 times the length of that set. So that took me 10 seconds. I should be taking at least a minute in between. All right, so that would be accommodating resistance, either bands or chains. In this case, we use chains, increasing the concentric demand, decreasing the deficit.